Okay, welcome back. Part 4 was stripping the housing down. The last video we pulled out the CV joint. So in this video we're going to knock down the swivel housing itself. But first of all we're going to remove the brake disc backing plate held on at the bottom here by a bolt and a nut. And a nut on the back of the stop lock, which you'll find here. Next thing to do is to actually remove the seal retainer and the seal itself. The seal retainer is held on by a series of bolts and they have 8mm heads on them. And what I found actually most helpful is heating them up a little bit first. This will allow the metal to expand and then contract, and that will crack the seal that the rust will have that's holding the bolts in. This tool costs about £70 new from Snap-on. Paddock sell a smaller version of this which is a lot more affordable, so it's worth checking out. This handy little torch I have here is butane powered, and it could be used as a soldering iron or just general duties, and I've found that this is actually a fantastic tool for doing this job. After letting the bolts cool down, then it's a matter of using an 8mm socket and 1/4 inch drive, winding the bolts off, and that will leave the retainer plate free. A couple of ways of doing this. If the top pin is actually out, you could lift it and that will pull everything out, the housing, the seal, everything like this, leaving the bottom bearing on the peg. Perhaps if you're a little more civilized, then what you'll do is take the retainer plate off and then using a screwdriver, which I have one down on the bench there with the yellow handle, is just lift the seal out and it should just pop out just like that, and we're away to go. That's stripped. This seal, you've got to give it its dues. It does a lot of hard work because it's very close to the road. There are 2 bolts that retain the bottom peg, depending on what axle you have, depending on what screws you have in there, and this is the Discovery. This particular swivel housing off the Discovery with ABS has a bar at the bottom retained in by the screws, which I'm heating to get them out. Size for the tool that you'll need for the Discovery one is a T40. Best way to get positive results is actually tap this in to clean out the rubbish so it will have a positive fit. Once you've unscrewed the bolts, either way, you have access to the bottom pin, which you can then just slip out. Like so. This component doesn't wear too much, just be aware that it might be worth your while measuring it before refitting it. Anyway, turning this round, you have the top peg, which there's 2 bolts you undo. And I'll just show you this little trick because you don't often get to see this. The flexi hose is held on by a clip which you can remove with a screwdriver like this. Just takes the flexi hose out if you have it fitted still. Anyway, best way to do this is to remove both pegs in one go. So we've got in a position where you can see it, and we're pulling the bottom peg and the top peg out. Alright. Okay, so that's these 2 components. Make sure you keep the shims, and it's worth checking the condition of this as you remove it to see if there's any damage on it. Alright, so once they're off, there is a bearing on the bottom one which will drop out as you lift it off. You see that fell on the floor. And what you're left with is your housing, which you're either going to chuck away or overhaul. As I said, you can pop it off this way if you like, which will leave the bearing in place. And in this case the top bearing actually dropped out. As we've seen before, the TD5 axle has a bearing on the top and the bottom. So this is the top bearing, and this is actually the problem. This is collapsed. Anyway, I'll recover this bearing. On the flange side of the ball, you have a seal for your half shaft. Pop that out with a suitable tool, possibly a screwdriver. Fairly easy, it's not in there tight. Pop it out and get rid of it. And the next thing to do is to clean out all the components so we can inspect them.